So, Dusty, we have had a wish list for a long, long time,
From
right?
the very beginning, we've had a great wish list.
And this name has been on it.
Yeah, over and over.
And every time I'd turn on my Instagram, I'd see a picture of you and our guest, and I was like, well, if he was in town, why didn't you ask him to do our podcast?
Well, I'm going to say this. You know, you give me a hard time about saying I always have my favorites.
Yes.
And I do have my favorites. And I Karen Peck is one of my favorites. This is one of my all-time favorite people and friends. And I'll probably have a ton of other artists and people. This really has been, I've been a fan, I admire, I'm a crybaby of this guy for years. And I met him years ago. But then when I went to work at New Day and Daywind, he became an even dear friend and a cheerleader of mine, an encourager of mine. Yeah. And I'm thrilled that we have Gerald Wolfe with us today. I'm like a little kid at Christmas.
Well,
it kind of is Christmas.
It kind of is.
Oddly enough, it is Christmas, and we are at a church outside of Nashville to hear. Gerald, tell us what we're going to hear tonight.
Tonight you're going to hear, we call it Family and Friends.
Yeah.
And it's Greater Vision and the Mylan Hayes family. And we've started talking about doing this tour 4 years ago.
Wow.
Finally got up the nerve to do it this year. Yeah. So it's going really well. We're having a blast.
What I love is last year, Gerald, most anybody who listens to our podcast and friends, all of our different people that we come in, the king of Christmas music in the genre of heart music is Gerald Wolfe. So he talks about Christmas music. He plays it. He has a great Christmas playlist. He hosts a show every year on Enlighten and with so many other radio stations. And last year, and I want him to talk about it because his experience was incredible. He brought to us an incredible award-winning record called Christmas in London, and did it with the London Symphony.
So actually the Royal Philharmonic.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you brought them to Nashville to record, right?
No. That would have probably been cheaper. We went to London and did the album at Abbey Road.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was an amazing experience.
So just this morning, before I came over here, I get a email about Black Friday specials, and one of them was a Wave plugin that had advertised the Abbey Road reverb.
Really?
And that it's supposed to, obviously it can't.
Right.
But I've never been there, but they say the floor is the original hardwood floor, and you can't recreate that reverb. Is that right?
Right. It was built in 1929 and opened in 1931, and it was the largest recording studio in the world, and still is.
Wow.
Studio One.
Yeah.
And that's where they do all the Star Wars soundtracks and Little Mermaid and all that.
So did you walk in, were you like that kid?
Oh yeah. You know,
they're probably used to that on some. Had you ever been there before?
I thought I had, because the Cathedrals did an album with that orchestra in '87. Right. And I thought that's where we did it. But we did it at CBS. And which was a large room. But when I walked into Abbey Road, I thought, this ain't the same place. Yeah. It is a huge 40 or 50 foot ceilings, and it's just unbelievable.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just as a fan of that, how far out do you have to book a room like that?
You know, I didn't know till we started working on it, and we started talking to them about 4 months ahead. And they said, well, we'll have to move some things. So they worked with us and got a day open where they could do it. We booked them for a full day. And they finished early because they are so good. They had never seen the music.
Right.
They didn't get it ahead of time. It was put on there music stands that morning, and they sight read it. And just, of course, they do that here in Nashville too.
Yeah.
Just something unique about the way they play off of each other, you know.
I can't imagine. Did they have? Again, I'm just a fan. I'm gonna live it vicariously through you. But did they have like a gallery of some of the history in the?
Oh yeah, down the hall they have all the album covers and the movie posters, and it's pretty. You know, the first movie they did there was Indiana Jones.
God,
that was first.
Think about that. Because I love that soundtrack.
Yeah.
Did they have George Younce boots on display?
No, because that's not where we went. The cathedrals were
Somewhere
at
they
CBS.
did. Oh, that's Alexandria. Bill Gaither has those on display.
Probably
You know what? I have a pair of those too.
Of course you
Do you really?
I really do, yeah.
You know,
I love that.
we'll get there, but when I was Spears, we worked a lot with cathedrals. And
Yeah.
So I'd sit out there and watch that. But George he wouldn't know me from Adam, and I don't even know that I ever met him, but I would hear things that he would say, and it impacted me. He said stuff like, buy you a pair of Luke Casey boots and they'll last the rest of your life. Well, that changed how I shop for boots, because I'd always worn them, but I'd never heard anybody say that.
Yeah.
And he also, one of my favorite lines that I've thought about so many times, and I heard this from Brock Spear, who was quoting George. So, I mean, it's got to be legit at that
Sure,
point.
yes.
But he said, I don't care what I buy as long as I don't have to pay for it all at once.
That's funny.
Have you ever heard that?
Well, no, but I don't count it. I don't count it. Now, when did you leave the Spears? What year?
I was there 81 through 86. So
Okay.
Roger left about the time that I left, and I was wanting to be a writer, and you know, that was family, and Brock said, well, how are you going to pay your bills? And I didn't know, but I was hardly paying them on what I was making there, so you know, it wasn't a big risk. Roger was leaving because he wanted to start a record label, and he started, was it Journey Records?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. Yes.
And then you replaced him, right?
I did.
And you were 23?
23.
Gosh.
Now, where was one of the last dates you did with them in Pennsylvania?
Harrisburg.
Harrisburg. That's where
At the
we
Forum.
met. Yeah,
That's right.
where we met.
This is why I love to tell the story. Right here is the kind of stuff.
And the Harrisburg had I was only there, I think, one time, but that auditorium had stars on the ceiling of it, like a constellation. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
And there was a mall there called Strawberry Square, an upstairs shopping mall. And we didn't have any money, but I saw a wicker guitar up at that. The reason I remember it, because I'd never seen a wicker guitar. You know, I was like, I just want that hanging in my house. And I got home and regretted not buying that. But that's what I remember. That I remember working with the cathedrals that
And
night.
the Couriers.
Yes.
Were they?
Wow.
Yep.
I remember that.
Wow. And you came in and you were, you know what, let's work our way up to that. I got some questions about the Dumplin Valley Boys. Is that?
Doesn't everybody? Sure.
So, are you familiar with this group?
I wasn't, believe it or not, I wasn't. But Gerald filled me in, and then I found, I even took a picture, I bought it. I found an album at McKay's with him on it. Do you remember me sending you a picture of it a couple of years ago? And then he told me the story. And of course, being at New Day Daywind, he would bring Dumplin Valley music and bring it up to Dottie and sell it to her.
Yeah.
So I heard he would deliver it to the old
I would
warehouse.
bring it over there.
Yeah.
In my Toyota Corolla wagon.
Wow.
And she would buy it.
Yep.
She was still working out of her garage.
Yep.
Then.
And do I remember this right? I always got to have one of these. Was it like Elmer Cole produced them?
Yes, he did.
Gosh.
Who was a songwriter?
Yes.
Who wrote
10,000 years.
10,000 Years?
Which the Rambos sang.
Yeah.
One of the few
Yeah.
Dottie Rambo songs, one of the few Rambo songs that Dottie didn't write.
Everybody-
that was a hit for them.
Everybody cut that.
Yeah.
Now, do you also remember right that Larry played piano on?
Yes, and it's a very interesting story in that a group came to my church in 1978 called the Sentinels. And their piano player was Ed Osborne. And I had never heard chords like he played, passing chords.
Wow.
So I sat on the side of the choir where I could watch it. And after the service, I went to the product table, which was outside. And I said, "Where did you learn those chords?" And he said, "It's not me. It's Larry Goss."
Wow.
Well, I'd never heard of Larry Goss, so he
you
gave
found
me
it?
an album
Wow.
of the
Goss
Sentinels
Brothers?
that Larry had played on. So I went home and looked through all my records, and I found Larry on Lefebvre's albums and Spear Family albums. And so I started listening and learning. It was 3 years later that I went to the studio for the first time. I was 17. And when I walked in, Larry was sitting at the piano in Elmer Cole's studio in Chattanooga.
Wow.
And he was sitting there playing those chords. And that's where we met.
That he was making them up as he went.
Making
There
them
was
up.
no name for what he did.
No.
But it became a cliche. You know, like some people say, "Well, we're going to make this and it was Goss, as far as arranging string charts, and I don't even think he ever went to school. I think he just kind of figured out how to write what he heard in his head.
You know, he bought a Henry Mancini orchestration book.
Wow.
And just, he didn't learn how to read music. He just learned out of that book. And this true story that he and Maurice Lefebvre told me. Larry was a teen, late teens, 17, 18, and he was already playing on sessions at Lefebvre Studio. And they had an orchestra session booked. And Larry called the head guy, the contractor, or the lead guy, and said, "We're not going to do the session today." So all the players showed up except the arranger with the charts. So Larry had these charts he had written and put them on the stands, and the players came in and started playing. And the first chair guy stopped. Wait. Who wrote this?
Wow.
And Larry was in the control room and said, "I did." And he said, "You've written things that don't work for these instruments. It's wrong. So let me work with you today." And so that guy sat with Larry and said, "Okay, this violin cannot play in this key. The oboe doesn't do this." And helped him.
Unbelievable.
And he became, a
But
legend.
you know what? Okay, so I love hearing that story because I didn't know any of that about Larry and about how you met him. But you were one that hooked your train to that, all the way through. You were one of Larry's loyal.
Oh,
All the way.
When some people go, well, we could get Larry or we could get. You never wavered from that, from what I remembered.
no, I stuck with Larry. He took an interest in me for some reason, and I just loved him. And even, after he got sick with cancer, and he couldn't come to the session, so I would do the rhythm sessions, and I would play what I thought he would play.
Yeah. Wow.
And then he would orchestrate it from home. And I think we were the first session to ever do a Zoom session
Unbelievable.
in Nashville.
Was there latency issues?
Yes. But Larry was sitting at home with his headphones
Yeah.
and listening, and he would, he'd be a little behind.
It's unbelievable.
He was the
How
first
cool
one to
is
do
that?
that.
It's very cool.
And that was before Zoom. What
Yeah.
was the other one before Zoom? I can't even remember the name of it.
yeah.
The first video conference thing.
Yeah.
Gerald had so many conversations about
Skype.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm slow.
No, that's good. We've had so many conversations about Larry because his music, the Greater Visions music, all the stuff that even when he produces other artists and stuff, it all has that Larry.
Yes.
But yet, what I loved about Larry is, I mean, you listen to Greater Vision, you listen to some of the other stuff, you listen to a Lanny Wolfe trio. They're all different, but there still is that heart. To me,
Yes.
it's heart.
Yeah.
It's that music that just, even when you were just playing in there, I want to say you were playing, If That Isn't Love. It was something. It was some, but it was the one the Angels called. Yeah, and I thought it had that Larry Goss feel, just the way you play. I've always said that, the way you play.
I'm not anywhere near the player, but thankfully we have some Larry Goss prodigies that are coming along. Bradley Knight.
Yes,
Bradley.
Yes.
You know,
Trey.
he worked with Larry.
Yeah.
Trey Ivy.
Yeah, I totally agree.
And they're just doing amazing.
So we used a kid for an anthem. And I work with a company called Littleness, and so we do a lot of choral music. And you're always looking for that next Russell Malden. His very first musical to ever arrange, I got to write. Mark Harris and I wrote a musical for Bradley Knight to arrange. I think it was his first full musical. He had done some collections and stuff. And so I've gotten to watch a lot of journeys. And we used a kid a couple of, maybe 6 months ago. Peyton Altman, do you know that name?
Oh, yeah. He's at First Baptist in the Trail.
Yes.
Yeah.
And my gut just said, all right, let's try this, and just blew me away. And you're talking about Larry's session. So Peyton, his first orc session, he was home watching by Zoom, and it got done, and the contractor said, who wrote this chart? And I said, his name's Peyton Altman, and he is watching on Zoom. This is his very first anthem. The string players in Nashville stood up and applauded.
Now
I've
that's
never
a big
seen
deal.
that.
Yeah,
That's a big
that's
deal.
awesome.
And you know, I love watching those kids. I remember
Yes.
going down to meet Cliff Duran.
Yeah.
When
Oh,
he
great.
was associate
great music
at down north of Atlanta and
Woodstock, maybe.
Yeah.
Woodstock,
I think it was
where he ended up going back. And now he's at Dallas First.
Yeah, but what, man? He's
Another one
incredible.
was Wayne
Oh,
Hahn.
Wayne Hahn, exactly
He
right.
worked with Larry
Yeah,
for.
Yeah.
yeah.
And Wayne was Peyton's mentor.
I did not know that.
So I called Wayne and I said, my gut says I want to give this kid an anthem.
Wow.
And I said, is he ready? And I'd already made the call. And Wayne said, he's been ready.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, Wayne, when the first time we worked with Wayne was, I think we were the first major budget that he had, and we did our album in Budapest, Hungary.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
And Wayne
It
did
was.
all that. And that's, songs that we still do today.
Yep.
My Name is Lazarus.
Yep. Yep.
That's 28 years old.
And Wayne, do I remember right? He's a French horn player. That's his background.
Yeah, started French horn, went to University of
Yeah.
Miami.
Which I didn't know that till a couple
I'll
of
tell
years
you,
ago.
interesting
I'm here to
I know,
enlighten you,
you're-
Dusty.
yeah.
An interesting thing about Wayne is I knew him when he was a kid. 10, 11 years old, playing the piano for his family group
Wow.
in Knoxville.
That's so. This whole
Years-
ball is so small.
Years ago, there was something that I'm thinking maybe it was Daywin did it, but they had some kind of reception at the Bluegrass Country Club.
Dottie was a member of that, so that
Okay,
doesn't
all right.
surprise me.
So I go and I'm sitting next to this lady, and she's kind of my age, and I could tell she's with somebody, but I'm always nervous in a crowd. And so we get to talking, and I finally said, and she's my age, and I finally said, so who are you connected with here? And she said, I'm Wayne Hahn's mother. And I just felt like I was 100 years
too.
old.
She's such a sweet lady.
Sweet
Such a
lady.
sweet lady.
But yeah, so watching the stories and you came on, you followed a pretty pivotal piece of the Cathedrals with Roger, because he had, and George allowed you guys to have a personality.
Yes.
And that was not the case with all the groups out there.
Right.
You're to fill this spot, and we'll be the, and I never knew, the thing with George, I don't know how much you got to see them live, but we could do back to back dates, and he'd tell the same joke every night, and you'd sit there like, I felt like I never heard it before.
Oh yeah.
There was a communication ability.
He was the best.
But he'd turn to you, or he'd turn to Roger and say, Dad, share what's on your heart.
Yeah.
And I always wondered, was that off the cuff? Was that?
Yes. You never knew when he was going to do that. And I'll tell you, I was with them after I'd been there a year. I was really wanting to go home, back to Tennessee.
Yeah.
I loved being on the bus,
Right.
but I didn't enjoy living in Northern Ohio.
Right. I don't blame you.
Yeah.
I'm from Michigan.
So the long trips didn't bother me.
Yeah.
But when I came home,
Yeah.
I wasn't home.
Yeah.
So I called George one day and said, George, I think I'm going to go home. And he said, little man, can you give me another year? I want to set you up. I want to help set you up.
Wow.
And I said, I'll do it for you.
Gosh.
And I stayed another year. And at the end of the year, I went to his house. And then I went to Glenn's house. Said, I'm moving back home.
Wow.
And they were the greatest cheerleaders
Wow.
for me.
Yeah.
And that wasn't the case with every group out there either.
No.
If somebody left, you.
Oh, yeah. That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, Glenn, after I left, Glenn would call me every now and then. And I remember one day he called about 3 months after I left. Yeah. Gerald, do you have health insurance yet? And I said, oh yeah, I've got it. He said, now do you really have, is it good insurance? I said, yes. He said, send me what you got on us. I want to make sure you're covered before I drop you.
Wow.
Wow.
That's the kind of guys they were.
Wow.
You know.
So when you came to them, this is the longest conversation you and I've ever had.
Yeah.
I've been a fan, but I'm always the guy watching from the back of the room. But so you auditioned at Joyful Noise.
Well, I went to see their live album recording on July 13th, 86 in Winston-Salem. I was in the balcony. So George mentioned that Larry was there. So during intermission, I went backstage to see if I could find Larry. And Roger Bennett stopped me and said, hey, I didn't know you were here, but I want to talk to you. He said, I'm leaving at the end of the year. And I'm going to recommend you
Wow.
to take my place. Because we'd worked together a little.
Yeah.
And he said, don't say anything about it till Glenn calls you. I said, okay. So that was July. 2 weeks before my wedding in October, Glenn called me from the West Coast. Said, when we get home, I want you to fly up and I want to hear you play. So I said, well, I'll be on my honeymoon. And he said, well, right after that.
We'll let you wait.
Yeah. So that was the first time I'd ever flown. And I flew to Cleveland and went to Glenn's house. They were all there. And we did 3 or 4 songs. And George said, well, you know all of our stuff. I said, oh yeah, I'm your biggest. And so about a month later, I went to the Joyful Noise to rehearse
Okay.
for 2 days.
Did you ever remember Joyful Noise?
Yeah, I did, because we lived in Atlanta when I first went to work for the Rambos. They lived in Stone Mountain.
Yeah.
I seen some of the last concerts at Joyful Noise, and I remember thinking when I went there, I'd always heard about it, but I thought, this is nothing like what I would think it would have
No.
been
No.
when you went in.
Even when you pull up to it, you went,
don't, and it's in the wrong. I
Yes.
remember being south of Atlanta, really, not in the greatest part of Atlanta.
No, it's not.
But I remember thinking, wow, this is where so much great music.
Was it Bill Flurry? Was
Bill Flurry.
it in Maryland?
Yes.
Yeah.
He had a son, Jason, maybe?
Yes. What a great memory.
No, I can't remember a lot, but
I just remember all the pictures of all the artists, all
Yes.
autographed. I thought that was
But
so
he was
cool.
he was a big player. You wanted on that stage. You wanted.
Yeah.
And do you remember what he called his kitchen help?
No.
A joyful racket. Remember? And they'd take a break and
That
and they
is
would.
so funny.
But so one of my favorite memories of Joyful Noise, one is that the first time Ben ever sang "The Next Time He Comes" was on that little stage. And I remember just watching the room. You couldn't breathe. Nobody knew what to do. It was. The other was Ben. He was always a lot of fun. We're going to have that interview coming up after the first of the year with one of the family. But he would do stuff just to annoy Brock.
Yes.
And there's a story somewhere about George maybe telling Scott Fowler, I know you don't think I'm all that smart, but please act like I'm funny when I'm telling a joke. Don't look at your watch.
I know you think I'm boring,
Yes.
but don't look at your watch when I'm talking.
That's
what it
so funny.
So Ben would pull out clippers and clip his nails while Brock was talking.
Okay.
And it was just,
That is.
and he wasn't doing it he just zoned out, that was, but that night at Joyful Noise, and there was, remember that little backstage room where all just props and all?
The closet.
Yes.
Yes.
Ben found a gas mask. And he said, "Why don't you wear that?" I said, "Okay." I didn't care. If Ben said to do it, so I put that gas, and I've got a picture of it at home. I walked out. So when we do "I'll Fly Away," I'd put the guitar down, I'd pick up the banjo, and when I picked up the banjo, I picked up that gas mask and put it on, and I walked up to the center mic, couldn't see, and the glasses were steamed up, and Brock is looking at me like, "What are you doing?" And Ben's doubled over laughing. And one of my favorite memories about Joyful Noise.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You remember-
Has
you remember-
nothing to do with this podcast.
Do you remember
How long did your job last after that?
They
Brock was always so stoic and just.
he was. And like I said, you'll love, we got Brian
Brian,
coming on.
Oh boy.
And there's 3 hours worth of
That's so
backstories, and
funny.
we can tell maybe a half hour of them. But
funny.
that was a good season. You had people like Bill Flora that would say, and another, I think I've seen some videos of, I assume you were at PTO because it was a Bosendorfer piano, and that was the only one I knew of that was out there. Is that where some of those were filmed?
Yeah.
My second week on the road, we were at PTO.
Wow.
In the barn. I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you had places like that, and you had, I don't know how Bill Flory made that work, but it was sold out every time you went there.
Yeah.
And you're thankful for those people in that season that kept that. And then as that started to go away, people like Gaither show up and that were always there, but they assume a different role.
Right.
Bill, the Cathedrals would do 3 nights in a row,
In January there.
and then we would do 3 nights or 2 nights in November every year.
Wow.
And sell it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that that's
Yeah.
A big room.
but still.
Yeah, and sometimes there were places like that. There were certain churches out there on the road that you just go, you see that one coming, and all of a sudden you knew that was going to be a trip you wanted to get on the bus. And
So when you left Cathedrals, you did two solo records?
I did.
For
Benson.
Yeah, for Benson, which I love. I love the one that had the duet with Joy on it. Oh, great record. Because we thought I knew of him in the Cathedrals, but I remember when his solo records, we've talked about this, everybody kept saying, this is going to be the new Steve Green. And we've joked about that. I mean, because it was church music. It was great. It was Southern gospel, heart music, but it was such music for the church. And so, how long before you started Greater Vision after that?
2 years.
2 years. So there was
Solo thing wasn't.
Did you do it very many dates?
I did about 120 a year.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a
But it wasn't. I mean, churches would
Yeah,
have me in
yeah.
the
Which is
senior
part-time
Yeah.
from the schedule that you had been on.
Oh, yeah.
choir. Cathedrals, man, we do 206.
Hey,
Yeah,
let me ask you a question. The name Greater Vision, was there a song on a Dumplin Valley record?
Yes. But the song, I actually wrote that song and entered it in a songwriting contest at the Quartet Convention, 1984.
No.
And I was sitting in the balcony when they announced the winners. And Diane Wilkinson she won first place, but I won third. I don't remember who won second.
Okay.
Probably Kirk, I don't
Isn't
remember.
that funny?
And then,
So that's where the name came from.
I always wondered, I assumed it, but
Yeah.
now you've written what, total of 3 songs? You've had 2 cuts, right?
Right. 2 cuts.
So by my math, that makes you one of the most successful writers in Christian music.
You need to add
doubt
that.
about
You
it.
need to add that into
No
when you
doubt about
introduce Rodney, John, and Chris. That you're the most successful out of all of them
There's
now.
no question about
Yeah.
it.
But I do have a question. You do something from a writer standpoint that there is a fine art to that not many people understand, and you nailed it.
what?
And that's writing parody. It's one
How
thing.
did you know about that?
Hey, I'm a fan.
Okay.
So, and because I'm fascinated with that, and I write a lot of that, but a lot of people will write what they call that, and it's not that. You have to find the right song for the right market, and then it has to be close enough, and then the syllables still have to line up.
Right.
Have
you heard his version of Looking for a Tenor?
No,
Are you kidding
I'm
me?
very disheartened with myself today because you know more about it than I thought I did. I'm gonna have to do my homework better.
Okay, I'm sure it's online
It's
somewhere.
on YouTube.
Okay.
So it lays perfectly, and it's the old.
I know the song.
Yeah.
I cannot believe I did not. I'm going to go to probably while the concert's going on. I'll be Googling all
Well,
this
you
stuff.
know, there was a running joke
Yeah.
in the
Yes.
80s, 90s that Florida boys were
Yeah.
always
Yeah.
eating dinner.
I mean,
Yeah.
and
And a lot of groups were.
Yeah. Yeah.
and so
I thought about that, and I thought, wouldn't that be a fun song to do if you could get the right quartet together?
Yeah,
And so we
it was
did
like
that.
Trammell and
Trammell, Arthur Rice on lead,
Right.
John Rulepaw on tenor.
and who was the piano player?
Stan Whitmire.
Yes,
who
yes.
plays that style perfectly.
Yes.
Yeah. That's
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's worth a listen because, you get past okay, that's cute and funny, but the craft and so my question when I'm going, so why don't you write more? Because so early on you have Elmer Cole producing, and then you end up with this little writer named Rodney Griffin who's hung with you for 2 or 3 decades.
Yeah.
So you've surrounded yourself with great writers, which tells me you have a lot greater understanding of a great song than most people would assume from somebody that doesn't write.
And he is one of the best. I would say probably in my mind that picks out the best songs for record. He's probably in the top 2
That's
or
why
3.
I've never had a cut.
He's okay. That's funny. But him and Rodney set a writing date for January, so we'll see.
Yeah, but
No, the truth is,
I'm not bitter, but
you've never pitched us a song.
because you have Rodney and Chris.
Yeah, but there's the big misconception there
That's
in that. And Dusty will tell
that's
you,
true. You
I'm looking for
Yes.
great songs.
Great
I don't
songs.
You were looking
care
for a
who
tenor.
wrote it, right?
Yeah.
I don't care who wrote it.
that is really
I don't
true.
care who the publisher is.
That's the truth.
as long as there's not 6 publishers.
Yep.
Sure, but so I'm on the road with, my one of the songs that I love the story about Tony Green and the Hallelujah Square.
Yeah, true
So-
story.
the first songwriter I ever met was Ray Overholt when I was a little kid in Michigan, because he was from my home,
Yeah.
who wrote Holiday Square.
10,000.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so, I've always been aware of where the writers were because I drew a lot of inspiration from them. And so when one of the big motivators for me to leave the Spears was that I was getting a couple cuts on a record, and that was a dream. They had always been my favorite group, but Harold Lane was their writer, and he had earned that right. And I knew if I was going to really dive into the deep end, I was gonna have to walk away from the confidence that I could always get a couple of cuts on a record. And Cathedrals, you may or may not know this, but Cathedrals were my very first cut.
What song?
It was it was on it. Do you remember a record called Sunshine and Roses?
Yeah.
My very first cut as a young writer was called Closer to You.
Really?
And so they will always hold a very special place in my heart.
Wow.
One of the worst covers in Christian music history.
Yes.
It was real dark and out
I
of
kind
focus.
of, I think it was a
Nothing
word title. I think it was
sunshine about it.
I think it was a word Canaan record.
Yes.
If I remember right. Yeah.
But that was a big cut for
I
a
love
kid.
the title of the record.
Yes,
I do remember that.
Yeah.
But I don't remember I don't remember the cover.
which ironically, Sunshine and Roses. You think bright.
Yeah, that's what.
It was like in this real
Yeah.
dark, like a Halloween kind of a.
Which
Anyway,
reminds me of a Glenn story.
Okay, you got to tell it.
yes, I know a lot of useless stuff, but probably the most useless piece of information that I
Here we
have
go.
stored away. Do you know where the name came from? I know now where the name came from. Greater Vision. You know where the name came from for Dumplin Valley?
Yes.
Do you know the story?
Oh, yeah.
All right. Is that like a big? Because I'm from the north. That was a big deal to find that out to me.
Okay.
Well,
Do you know, Dustin?
No.
okay.
You're about to find out.
I am so
The
mad at
group.
myself right now.
The group started out of Dumplin Baptist Church.
Okay.
I'm talking about the name Dumplin Valley.
Oh, you mean the history?
The history of the name.
of the Dumplin Creek Treaty, where the Cherokee Indians signed with the white man. And they were, do you know the story? They were cooking
Right.
dumplings.
On the way to the battle
On the
of
way to the battle.
Chattanooga.
Okay.
Yes.
And they dumped them into the creek.
in the river.
In the river there that goes through.
Yeah. And
The
that's
French Broad, I guess it is. And
That's okay. Now you can fast forward.
Now-
Now that we've got that little.
that is that's a very important piece of information, isn't it?
Well, those kind of little stories. I love even the story of Kodak over where you're from. You know where that came from.
no, don't.
Would you like to? So the guy finds this camera that was really unique. It was a Kodak camera. And he was settled in that little village. And he called, I think the guy was named Harvey Eastman or something. It was Eastman Kodak. And he said, we just love the name. And would you consent to us naming our village?
Kodak.
There you have it.
There it is. Okay, I want to hear Dumplin Valley.
Okay, yeah, now let's go forward.
So,
about it?
because the one guy that I like, I cannot believe it.
Brady?
Kyle, because he was one of the he's the original, right?
It's the only original.
Yeah, and he's one of your
group.
dearest friends.
Yep.
Bring him to Nashville, and we get to talk. So tell me how that happened. I mean, what happened? Were you at the
How did I
church?
get
How did you get with them?
They
Yeah.
came to our church
In
February of '81. I was a senior in high school,
Yeah.
and I was the
church organist. So they did their first set, and then they took a break, and then some other group sang, and the piano player thought they were done. His name was Rusty Mastingill, and he lived about 60 miles away. So he left and went home. So when they called him back, they didn't have a piano player. So the lead singer struggled to get through one song. And then his name was Ron Martin, Kyla Rowland's brother.
Yeah.
And he said, how about that kid play the organ. Can you play a couple of songs on the piano? I said, sure. So I went and played.
Wow.
And then the next week, their piano player quit because his mom was ill.
Yeah.
And he needed to be home. And so they called me, and I went on the road.
Wow.
And they would get me home on Monday in time to get in to finish school, you know.
I love those stories.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when you came into Cathedrals, what was the Homeland song? What was it?
Homeland.
Was that
That's
the name of it?
Roger actually recorded it on the album.
Yes. And back in that day, a lot of times they would bring in somebody and say, okay, that was their song, so we're going to find you something new. And I remember you taking that and making it yours. I'd never seen anybody that young sing with so much. I mean, there wasn't you were all in on every syllable that you sang. I mean, it was a confidence that and you looked like you were 15.
Well,
and
was
whenever
23.
you talked, you were like preaching. I mean, your hands were going, and you were, and you went there just like you were singing and playing with that same level of where did that come easy to you? Was that with the Dumplin, or did you grow up doing that on?
I was not an MC with the Dumplin Valley Boys or a talker, but I grew up in a very active church setting. No, independent missionary Baptist, and I was around preachers all the time. That were my heroes. That's why I wanted to wear a suit.
Wow.
And so I learned, had great Bible teachers growing up. Wow. So I learned a lot of Bible history, especially Old Testament stuff that I really still enjoy. And then great motivators who could preach. But they had something to say. It wasn't just noise. They always had great lines and very deep things to think about. And so I just would draw from that when George would say.
It was authentic. I mean, you were completely at home. If you,
Very comfortable with that.
Oh yeah.
So you're doing the cathedral thing, and one of the things back in that era, and Dusty, you remember this too, that there were the old time groups who were the gatekeepers for our industry, and they would bring in people, and they would do a season there, and then they would go start their own. And so we're still feeling the effects of Rex and Elin and George and Glenn and you see Mark Trammell and an interesting little piece about Mark Trammell that wouldn't surprise you, but Ben's gone now, so I can tell these stories. So you may or may not know that Ben he had a little Marantz cassette recorder, and he would hook that at the back of when we would run sound, and he would put the group on one side and one. So you've heard some of those are legendaries. I'm not gonna get into here because still got family living, but funny stuff. So I asked him one time, because he would do that when we'd work with other groups. He would just pick somebody, and I asked him one time, so who had the truest pitches of any singer you ever worked with? He said Mark Trammell.
Oh yeah, no doubt about it.
And Mark doesn't.
I've heard you say that before.
Yes.
I've heard you say that before.
He didn't hesitate at all. But you leave and you go. I'm going to ask you some questions, just because I want to know, and if you don't want them on here, I'll edit them out.
Okay.
Oh, this is going to be dangerous.
I always say that, and I never do. So.
Good answer. Okay.
So, I don't know how much you know about my story, but the throat disease for 19 years, and out of that well is every song I've ever written.
Yeah.
And when I finally resigned, my last night with Spears was at the Quartet Convention, and they walked me up to the stage, and I leaned against the back wall because I was too weak to stand up, and I didn't know what God had. I just knew I needed I needed to get on with the call. And I remember in the years I was with the Spears, I met a guy named Steve Adams. And Steve had the Steve Adams Trio. And I don't know if you know his story, but there was an accident with some kind of fuel leak that got to his throat and he couldn't sing anymore. And so he found a way to continue using what God had called him to do by traveling with Doug Oldham.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember a night in Dayton, Ohio, when the Spears worked with Doug, and here's these two guys with pretty rough throat issues trying to talk backstage. And I remember how you came on. I was at Benson when they were wanting to make Gerald the next Steve Green. Yeah. And they talked about, vocally, absolutely. And Kelly Nealon had just done her first solo record. And it was that season when they were looking at these communicators that were in Southern saying, hey, we think we can.
Yeah.
Okay, all that to say, whatever you've gone through physically, no one would have blamed, said, all right, God, shut that door. And I mentioned the gatekeepers like George and Glenn, and having lived 19 years with my own throat issues, and I hear you talk and lean into a mic, and I go, the call was bigger than the battle that you were fighting.
Yeah.
And I look at the influence, how you now have become the gatekeeper.
Yes.
Even when you can't talk at full voice, and yet God still found a way. Any of that, as I say all that, what are you thinking? Is that anything you want to go into at all?
When this issue with me first started, it was about 13 years ago. And, we were always kind of jokingly known for holding out endings longer than anybody.
Yeah.
And it was funny. But I noticed I wasn't able to do that. I didn't have the wind. So I went to an ENT. He said, you're fine, you need sinus surgery. So I had sinus surgery. Didn't help. And it kept getting worse. And then some days I could sing, sometimes I couldn't, sometimes I could talk. Sometimes it kept getting worse. Finally, Vanderbilt diagnosed it as muscle tension dysphonia. Well, by then I was way down the road. Sure. If you catch that early, like so many singers we know that have had it, that I could name and everybody would know them, if they catch it early, it can be corrected with therapy. But I was way down the road. So I went from Vanderbilt to Emory, to the injections, to weeks and weeks of therapy, all of that kept getting worse. So I just decided one week on the bus that my singing was done. And that didn't have a psychological effect on me. Yeah. It was just like turning a page.
Wow.
That's done.
Wow.
So I thought, so what am I supposed to do? Well, I love playing.
Yeah.
And I will tell you that I never begged God or even asked God to let me be a singer. That's just what I always did from the time I was 3, They'd put me on the stand at church and I would sing. So that's what I did. But when I was 14, I started begging God to let me learn to play the piano. I was an organist. I was an organist. But I wanted to play. It's a totally different thing to play the piano.
Yeah. Yep.
So I just would pray and I would say, please let me learn. And then I heard Larry on that record, 78, for the first time. And I thought, that's it. That's what I want to do. And I would pray and play and set the needle back on the records and try to figure it out. And it just came. So when I started going through all this and getting worse and worse and worse, I just, I got I text John Apley one day and said, "What are you doing now?" And he said, "Driving a FedEx truck."
I love
And I
this
said,
story.
"Where do you live?" And he said, "Johnson City." Well, that's 60 miles from us.
Yeah.
So I said, "What are you doing Tuesday?" He said, "Well, I'm working till 4. And I said, "Come to my house Tuesday night for supper." So I told Chris and Rodney to be there. And John came down and we ate. And then I went to the piano and I said, "Let's sing a little bit." So sang. And then John sounded good. His baritone was a little deeper than mine was. And I said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" He said, "To work." I said, do you have any personal days?" He said, "Yeah." So I said, "Take a day and meet us at the studio in Knoxville." Well, I'd already done the tracks. So we recorded the next day. And that's when I told my family
You did.
that I was finished. I didn't discuss it
Yeah.
at the time.
Yeah.
But you don't look back.
I just knew that was it. And so I've never been depressed by that. And I'll
That's
tell you,
awesome.
I have been thankful
Yeah.
that God has given me something to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even I notice when I MC now,
Yeah.
people tend to listen
Oh, I
Absolutely.
believe
to
it.
somebody.
Yeah.
who
I
puts-
believe that. Yeah.
you know,
And the tempo of knowing how to manage a platform is not
No.
reliant on a strong voice.
no. And I don't think you can learn that either.
No.
The way George did
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
And I'll tell you, I went to see Dr. Charles Stanley, who's
Right.
a friend of mine for a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And I walked into his house. He was sitting in his recliner with his Bible on his lap, with his glasses down on his nose. And I sat down and he said, this was just a few months before he died. He said, "I wish I could preach one more time." And I said, "Dr. Stanley, I heard you preach this morning." I said, "You're preaching somewhere right now. Somebody is hearing you somewhere in the world right now." And he started crying. And he said, "How do you deal with not singing after doing it for so long?" And I looked at him, true story. I said, "Well, we don't always get to choose our circumstances,
You say it all the time.
but we do get to choose how we respond." Wow. And he said, "That's exactly right." And I said, "I know it is." I said, "Do you know who told me that?" He said, "Who?" I said, "You."
It's my favorite story.
Over and over.
Wow.
So that's true. And that's the way we
Yeah.
are supposed to look at life
Yes.
as a believer.
Yeah.
Do we really believe
Yeah.
what we
Yes.
sing? And if we do,
So true.
then we got to trust
Yeah.
Yeah.
that
Wow.
He knows more than we do. You know?
And you have no idea, maybe you do, I shouldn't assume that, how many people need to hear what you just
Yeah.
said.
Yeah. I believe it. I do.
I need to hear it.
Yeah. Me too.
Well, and sometimes you need to say it.
Yes, exactly.
So you got, we could, there's so many questions that are flowing in my mind, and I know you've got stuff to do today, but we could go on for another 2 or 3 hours. But one of the biggest points of impact that you do is the hymn sings.
Yes.
And, the writer in me when I hear somebody doing a hymn record, my first thing is, oh, they don't want to pay royalties. They want to find a bunch of PD songs, and I'm laughing at them.
Yeah.
I hear that. Yeah.
But you go way back to your earliest stuff. There were hymns on the Dumplin Valley.
Yes.
You've been that guy. You did. Do I remember that you did like 100 hymns for a 4 CD?
piano thing.
Yeah. For Benson, I
For
think
Damon.
20,
For
or was it
Damon.
Damon? And then, but that you did a piano thing for Benson too. The 20
Well, that was Greater Vision.
Greater Vision. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
And we did a Hymns of the Ages album
Yeah,
with
that's
Larry.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I tried to get to the one last week over in Sevierville. I wish I could have.
But no, we didn't do just.
No.
I mean, we
But
call it gospel music.
Yes.
And sing.
But it was
Somebody-
so good.
Because we
Somebody told me we had a song that was done there that night called "Ever Present, Ever Faithful,"
Yeah.
When
Jim-
Melissa
Jim
and
and
Jim
Melissa
Brady, I'm
did
telling you what,
and I
it was absolutely incredible.
love Jim and Melissa. Because a writer, that's the only payoff you get. It's not the charts. It's not certainly not the royalties. You want to see it work.
Yeah, and it worked. It
And,
worked that night.
But like that song, we were kind of focusing on songs of hope
Yeah.
and thanksgiving.
Yes.
Wow.
And for the hurricane victims. you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And that song,
Oh,
that'll be around 50 years from
It
now.
will. You're
100
exactly
years
That's
from now.
that's every writer's goal is if you don't write for radio, you have a whole lot better chance of not only getting radio, but and I have some theories about why that has changed through the years too. And we've got a song just telling the worship leader at the church we're at. He was talking about "Strange Way to Save the World," that was introduced 30 years ago this year.
Yeah.
And you go, that's a writer's dream. It's not about what did it make. And that song never went number one, but it's still getting cut. And
touches a lot of people's lives.
but so my question, having not been to one of those hymn sings,
Oh, Dave.
I'm a story guy, and I'm wondering, do you tell hymn stories ever of those?
Sometimes, like, I will go back and find a story about, like, It Is Well, which
Yeah.
everybody knows. Or I have decided to follow Jesus, which is
Yeah.
an amazing story. And I will share that if I think it will
Will help,
benefit
yes.
Yeah.
the audience.
What's your favorite hymn story?
But my favorite one is It Is Well.
Well, yeah,
Because that's,
that's it.
I mean, how could you draw that
Yeah.
out of such tragedy?
Somebody said that lyric is in a museum somewhere. Have you?
I would.
I don't know, but I wouldn't.
And I love the hymn story. A couple of my favorite are. Do you know the song "Where He Leads Me, I Will Follow"?
I do know.
Where He leads me, you know the story behind that.
No.
Ernest Blandy, I believe was his name, 1890. He was a Salvation Army pastor, and he was getting near the end of his career. And the Salvation Army gave him a choice of 2 locations that he could work into retirement. One was a fairly cushy job back in that day, and would have a nice financial package. The other option was, back in that day is when they actually called Hell's Kitchen in New York. That was when they gave it that name. And they were doing a New Start Salvation Army in Hell's Kitchen, and they gave him the choice of the cushy or the Hell's Kitchen. And he obviously took Hell's Kitchen. And after he made the decision, he sat down that night and wrote, "Where He leads me, I will follow, and I'll go with Him all the way. He'll go with me through the." And yeah, I love those.
Yeah.
Another one more hymn story that you'll appreciate. I told you I work for a company called Littleness.
Yes.
A lot of people wonder where you got that name. You probably know, I'm assuming, a guy named Howler Littleness.
Yes.
And Howler was a songwriter. He died in 1959, and I'm fascinated with his story. But one of the interesting pieces of it, his most well-known song is probably "Wonderful Grace of Jesus," and at Cathedrals used to do that, right?
Yeah.
Lean in a cappella.
Yeah.
So he's out in Iowa, and he gets this little house, and they don't have any money, but he needs something to write on. So he finds a used organ, and he bought it for $5. And I've seen the organ. And he one of the first songs that he wrote on that was Wonderful Grace of Jesus. And when he sold his catalog to the Church of the Nazarene, with that acquisition, they became the largest holder of evangelical copyrights at that day. Okay. They inherited all his catalog. But he sold that song, Wonderful Grace of Jesus, outright for $5.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
He made back what he spent on the organ. And what people don't know is that his greatest fear about that song was that it would ever be done up-tempo. Now think about that, the irony of that. Because he said the grace of Jesus deserved to be treated with reverence. And when you hear it, it's always been up-tempo.
Always.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
And it still works. We still celebrate it.
And we do it on our hymn sings.
yeah,
Oh, really?
With the
Oh,
audience.
yep, he does.
And I love those stories just because they make, the more of those that I know, the more I listen to differently.
Well, what
Right.
I love,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yes.
What I love about the hymn sings is what they've done with all that going into nurse. I don't know if you know all those DVDs going
Yes,
to nursing
rest
homes
homes
and rest homes and all kinds of.
Yeah, that
it's-
started, the reason we did a hymn sing to begin with is because we were in Chippewa, Indiana one night. After intermission, somebody had asked me to play a piano solo. So after intermission, I said, let me just get 3 or 4 requests for hymns, and I'll put together a medley and I'll play them. So they yelled out, So I did a medley off the cuff, and the audience started singing.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So when I finished it, somebody yelled out another one, and it went on for 45 minutes.
Wow.
It's just they wanted to sing. So when we got in the bus, I told the guys, I said, those people miss
Yeah, they do.
singing.
Sure.
Yeah, they sure do.
They can't sing songs they don't know.
Yeah.
Right, right.
So we did one at my church on a Monday night in July 10 years ago. And our church seats 1,200.
Yeah. Yep.
We turned away on a Monday night in July several, a couple hundred people.
Wow.
And so we recorded it because I wanted to get that capture.
Yeah.
Not for the money, because it cost us a lot. But,
Yeah.
And then it wasn't long after that till my dad ended up in a nursing home the last 4 months of his life with Parkinson's. And Mom would go up and sit next to his bed every day from the 8 in the morning when they would let her in till they would make her leave at night every day. And so I would go up to visit, and he always knew me. And I was leaving one day, and they had this little activity room, it's really the napping room. And so there were about 20 patients in there, and the TV was on, blaring, and they were just asleep.
Yeah.
And this young lady came in, probably in her 20s, with a guitar, and started tuning it, and I thought, bless her heart,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's going to be terrible.
Yeah.
So she started singing in Sweet By and By. And by the time she got to the second verse, every one of those people were making noise, crying.
Yes.
And I just cried. And I went and sat in my truck,
Yeah.
and I thought, that's what we're supposed to do with those videos.
Yes.
So good.
Yes.
So good.
So we started sending them to nursing homes. And we sent them to every nursing home in America.
Yeah.
15,640.
Good night.
And then we did the veterans' homes. And then we did all the hospice
Yeah.
facilities. And we would send CDs with those because some of the hospice patients, don't open their eyes. And now we're doing assisted living and Alzheimer's. And just send it out. And the notes. I tell you the sweetest thing, and it still gets to me. I got a handwritten note from a nursing home and the activity director. And she said, we watch your videos all the time.
Wow.
And our residents want to help you send more. And they took up an offering and sent me $6 from their ice. They get a little allowance.
Nice.
They get an allowance for ice cream or whatever they're going to do. Sent me $6
Awesome.
in ones and change.
It's amazing.
And I sent a picture of it to all the team, that
Absolutely.
And I said, this is why
Yeah.
we do it.
That's right.
This is why.
$6.
It's $6. And
Wow.
so, as long as the Lord will let us, we'll keep
I
doing
go
it.
to as many as I can, and he knows that.
Oh, yeah, people come.
I went
You've never invited me.
Well, I'm telling you what. Last week, I loved all of them. I mean, they're all so good. But last week, I sat kind of in the back. Levon and I were there. When you watch those people, we're all different denominations.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Everything.
Catholics, Presbyterians. I mean,
Yeah.
Pentecostals. When you watch them, they start raising their hands on those hymns, which we all see on Sunday morning. If we go to a church that does mixed word, I can't believe how many times I'll go to our own church. They'll sing a modern worship song and nobody does anything, but all of a sudden they'll sing it. They'll start singing, "How Great Thou Art."
Yeah.
Or "Blessed Assurance." The people's hands
Well,
just
can I say, when I was a kid,
Yeah.
we didn't go, we went on one vacation a year. But when I was growing up, it didn't matter where you were. If you were in Florida,
Yeah.
North Carolina, Michigan,
Yeah.
it didn't matter where you went. You could go into a church,
Yep.
whether it be Methodist,
Yep.
Right.
Baptist, Presbyterian,
Yep.
and you would at least,
Yes.
Yeah.
you may not know the doctrine,
But you
Yeah.
know the song.
but you would know the songs.
That's so
Yeah.
true.
Because they were all singing off the same sheet,
Yeah.
basically. And so I think now, and I love new songs. You don't write old songs, but I think there's a lot of value
Yes.
in those songs that bring us together.
Absolutely.
That's as close to heaven as we can get
Absolutely.
here. When the body,
Oh, I love that.
it doesn't matter who you are.
Absolutely.
We're on the same page. So that's why we love them.
So
Gosh.
this has been fascinating. I was nervous coming in here. I didn't feel like I knew you very well, and I didn't know what to expect. And you have had an impact on people like me who watch from the back of the room. And Dusty will tell you, you've been one that from the very beginning. I thought I'd love, and this has been great. What is there? How can people that watch this or listen to it? How can they get in on that? How can they help support you? Where can they send their $6?
They can send their $6.
Oh,
We have a foundation,
Yeah.
and it's at Gospel Music Hymn Sing, gospelmusichymnsing.com. And people from all over, help with that. And we don't have a paid staff. There's one old guy that comes in, volunteers every 2 weeks. And he does the deposits and does all the receipts.
That's awesome.
Since I just volunteer, and you're looking at the old guy. We don't have a staff. And Rodney's wife,
Which I
Regina,
love. Yes.
packages the DVDs and send them out.
I've been to Rodney's house, and
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't walk in the basement for tripping over DVD boxes.
That's what she does.
Dusty, anything else you got?
No, I'm so proud of this guy.
Yeah.
Thankful for his friendship.
I love you guys.
Truly one of the best. I love how he has not let what he talked about rule his life. He's one of the best communicators ever out there. And I love how he leads people to Jesus with music, heart songs. We talk about it all
we
the
only
time.
get one
Yeah.
life,
And he's been,
and we got to make it count.
yes. He's
And
one of the
that's-
best.
that's
That's why
why
we
we-
love to tell the stories.
Yep, that's what I love to tell the story. Thank you so much, Gerald.
Thank you.